Hey folks, Mr. Zagari here from the Underground Bunker, and welcome to the latest episode of the APUSH Underground. Okay, so let's get started. Quick review video today. We are targeting Unit 2 in our APUSH curriculum, and we're in the time period 1607 to 1754. So just a reminder, and I'll remind you at the end of this video, make sure you look in the description box for those learning objectives that will help us get a good handle on this content. So let's get started. So first topic 2.2, we're looking at European colonization. And just a reminder, as we go through these videos, there are times where these topic numbers, that the way that College Board has it set up, don't really coincide with the video that we're doing. For the most part, we'll make that clear for you. But for this video today, I will be going in the order that College Board has it. So that's my disclaimer. So what we're looking at today is topic 2, unit 2, and this is topic 2.2, European colonization. So we're looking at Spanish, French, Dutch, and British colonies in the New World, in North America. So we see here on this map, we're looking at where they settled. We see now what we're going to look at are the differences between the colonies, between these settlements, between the British, the French, and the Dutch, and the Spanish. They're all coming in for the same, a lot of it, the same theme here is the 3 Gs, that glory, God, and gold is a big reason why they are coming in. They are economically driven for coming into this new world, looking for the riches of the new world, looking for a Northwest Passage. But we're going to see that while they are coming in, they're going to have different types of settlements. The Spanish are going to have their settlements are going to incorporate Native Americans into their societal structures, whereas the French are going to have more of a open relationship with them. And the British are just going to have removal of Native Americans. And a lot of that is going to deal with why they are here. So their relationship with American Indians is going to be dictated by their economic reasons for coming into the New World. So the Spanish are going to come in, they're going to make their riches, and they're going to look to leave. The French are more, I want to use the word wanderers to some extent. They don't have major settlements. You have Quebec. They're going to be outposts along the that Trans-Mississippi region. And then the British are going to be the ones, and for our purposes, we're going to be really concentrating on the British settlements, because that's where our content lies. The British settlements are going to be the settlements to look to stay, especially what has been going on in Britain and their motivations for coming to settle. They have the conquest of Ireland. You have inflation is running rampant in England during this time period, as well as you have just land is not readily available in England during this era. So there's social issues going on between the social classes, which is all playing a major role in this. Okay, so within that, let's concentrate on the 3 distinct colonial regions. Now we're going to concentrate on the British 13 colonies, and you're going to have 3 distinct colonial regions, with New England, the middle, and the southern, which started off as really the New England region and the Chesapeake region. That's going to expand into these 3 distinctive regions. And these 3 distinctive regions are all going to be creating a regional and cultural differences between them, which they still are today, these regions. But what we're going to see is that the economies of these regions are going to be thriving between agriculture in the southern colonies, with plantation farming and cash crops. And in the early days of this, it's going to be indigo, rice, and tobacco. Tobacco is going to be more in the Virginia region, that Chesapeake region, and indigo and rice is going to be more in the Carolinas. And that's going to be the major exports. And then as you move north into the middle colonies, it's going to be more of the wheats, the cereal crops, so to speak. It's going to be the middle colonies. But what we're going to see here is that was nicknamed the breadbasket of the colonies, and that's going to be your grains. But then that region is also littered with rivers, and it's making it accessible to the interior parts of the colonies are navigable. So it's going to be major trade routes as well. So now you're going to have not only going to have a rich farming class, but then you're going to also have a very wealthy merchant class developing. And then in the New England region, you're going to have where farming is going to be subsistence level, you're going to have more of a wealthy merchant class happening in New England. So what we're going to see here is the big picture with this is that geography is dictating economy in the 13 colonies. And what we're going to see a massive push here in the southern colonies is going to be that slave labor is going to come in. And this is why slavery is going to be really prevalent in the South and in the middle colonies in the early stages of the British colonies, but not so much in the New England colonies. So these differences are going to be economic, but then as a result of the economic differences, it's also going to be impact the cultural differences. Okay, now as we look at them as individual regions, now we look at the 13 colonies as a whole, and that's in 2.4 with the transatlantic trade. So now we're going to start to see here is that the British colonies are going to be part of this trade route with Europe and Africa. So the colonies are going to be the raw materials from the colonies. The colonies become this shopping mall, so to speak, this Home Depot, if you will, of raw materials that are then going to be shipped to Europe, where they're then are going to be manufactured and then brought to Africa and other regions of the world, and then be traded for slaves. And those slaves are going to be brought through the Middle Passage, that dreaded Middle Passage, back to the 13 colonies. Now, what this is all creating is starting to see a globalized economy. And most notably is with these colonial regions coming together, you're starting to see Britain practice the economic ideology of mercantilism. And that's an important term that we need to remember is the ideology of mercantilism, that the goal of a mother country is to benefit from the economic trade of her colonies. And most notably, the economies of the world are basically measured on the wealth of gold and silver. There was no paper money, there was no Bitcoin or anything like that during this era. So it's all measured by hard gold and silver. So by having strict control over their colonial trade and this ideology of mercantilism, it would go back to those 3 G's of glory, God, and gold, where the British then could be one of the most powerful countries in the world. And by doing so, they would have to install this strict trade, and that's how they were going to develop the navigation acts going on during this time period. And we'll talk about that more in Unit 3 as one of the causes of the revolution, and we'll see that come to fruition later. But we're starting to see the ideology of mercantilism, as well as the increase. We're going to see over 3 million slaves coming into the British colonies during this time period. And we're starting to see that slave population rise, and which we're going to talk about in a second. So the transatlantic slave trade is what we're seeing. So we have the individual colonies at the previous slide, those 3 colonial regions. Now we're talking about the colonies as a whole as part of that transatlantic trade. All right, so now as these groups came, and again, we're looking at this through the lens of the British. But if you look at the lens of all European countries that are coming to North America, they weren't the only people in North America. There were Native Americans living here beforehand. and we saw that the French had a more positive relationship with the Native Americans. They intermarried with various Ojibwe groups in the Great Lakes regions, various Algonquin-speaking groups, and they had trading partners with them. They were giving they were trading with these American Indian groups and with land and for metalware, for stone pots, for gunpowder, whatever the case may be. So they had and then their biggest thing was for the fur trade. So the American Indians were helping them with the fur trade, and the French were in turn giving them these manufactured goods. The Spanish, on the other hand, while they were not having a positive relationship with them, I would say, but they did incorporate them in their social structure, albeit it was at the bottom of the social structure. The British, on the other hand, they couldn't enslave them, so they were going then to be the forced removal of them. And that forced removal of American Indians from the eastern seaboard is going to basically be the status quo, the Indian policy of the British colonies, and then later the United States, all the way into the 20th century. So we're going to see that the British policy that is taking form now with the forced removal of American Indians is going to be the status quo, even as the British colonies then turn into the United States of America. And what you're going to see here is that there's going to be some pushback from American Indian groups. We're going to see with Metacom's War, or what they called King Philip's War, where various American Indian groups in New England are going to push to fight back against encroachment of white Americans. Historian Ned Blackhawk out of Yale University argues that most American wars fought on the continent, okay, has a start with the interior, meaning that it all starts with conflict with Native Americans. So whether that's the French and Indian War, which we're going to start, that's what this is all leading up to. So these issues with Native Americans that are starting in the interior, whether it's Metacom's War or just conflict skirmishes that are happening, are going to be, and this is happening well in, way before. We saw that with Bacon's Rebellion, with the indentured servants. Mr. O'Hagan talked about that in the Unit 1 review. But, with Bacon's Rebellion, that started off as a Native American conflict. So all of these conflicts that are taking place in America take place in the interior. French and Indian War, the American Revolution, War of 1812, they all have their start in the interior, and all of it has to do with America, all has some connection back to American Indians. Okay, now we talked about one group that was being oppressed with the American Indians. Now we're going to look at slavery in the colonies. So now these rich plantation owners that are living in the South, what you're starting to see here is that these plantation owners wanted and needed a stable workforce, okay? They saw the disorders that were happening with the indentured servants of Bacon's Rebellion, so they saw a stable workforce in the slaves coming into the colonies. So by having this massive amount of cheap labor, they were able to make an enormous amount of profit. They implemented slave codes, and what they called this was chattel slavery, property. And these slaves were then willed for generation after generation after generation, and through that dreaded middle passage, as you could see in that. It was cargo. It was human cargo is what this was. And we're going to talk more about slavery, obviously, throughout the course as we start to see. But, we see this awful institution that really started to take form during this era. And it's that plantation system in the South that just snowballed into economic profits that were happening during this time period. But these slave codes were meant to restrict the advancement of African Americans, So there was no education system for them. There was no they weren't allowed to read. They weren't allowed to write because they did not want them. White plantation owners did not want them to be educated because they felt that this then could lead them to some sort of rebellion. But still, what did we see? We did see, however, that African slaves, while they were working on these plantations, they did not live near the plantation owners. So they did practice their own culture. So there's two forms of culture developing in the Americas during this time period. You have white culture, the Anglican culture, that we're going to talk about in a second. But then you also had this slave culture, this black culture that is developing as well, that is going to be part of the melting pot that would become the United States as we go on. Okay, and then we're going to end this with 2.7, colonial society and culture. And what we're going to start to see is the intellectual exchange. You're going to see part of the Enlightenment period happening during this time period. The ideas of government, most notably with John Locke, that these ideas of government, three branches of government, separation of powers, all of that is starting to come down the pike, so to speak, of these ideas. You're going to start to see the first great awakening, this religious revival, this religious Christian revival that is sweeping through the colonies, that is going to be more of a top-down type of revival where the preacher speaks to the people, God speaks to the preacher speaks to the people. Winfield right here is one of the main people as part of this revival, and this is a very educated revival where the preachers here are very educated, Harvard educated people, and that they are going to be the ones that are going to be practicing this revival, but it's sweeping across the nation. And then you're going to start to see this Anglicanization, this more British type of the American colonies are forming. They're more British. They're becoming more British in that sense that they're proud to be British, but then they're also becoming more autonomous off of the British model. Granted, there's no king and queen here in the colonies, but the distance between the colonies and Great Britain is inherently creating the colonies to create their own form of government. And what we're starting to see is that the British are allowing this to happen, this idea of salutary neglect, where the colonies are developing their own system of government. Examples would be the Mayflower Compact in Massachusetts, the Fundamental Orders of Connecticut in Connecticut, but the biggest example would be the House of Burgesses in Virginia. These are all representative governments, albeit they are representative governments, but they are representative governments for the rich white elite. If you're a poor farmer living in Virginia, you are not having any type of political power. Obviously, if you're African American or an American Indian, you are not having any political power. This is really the rich white elite that are holding the seat of government. But we are starting to see that notion of self-governing is getting into the root minds of these colonists, and that is going to fester in the minds of generations to come, when this will eventually lead to. Plus, you're starting to see here intercolonial commercial ties. You're starting to see a print culture starting to happen with the growth of newspapers within the colonies. So the colonies are starting to communicate with each other, and we're seeing this. They're starting to form their own identity, if you will, and that's only going to expand as the time goes on, especially once you get through the French and Indian War. So this was Unit 2, 1607 to 1754. Make sure you see the description for the learning objectives, and we'll see you soon. This is Mr. Zagari from the APUSH Underground. Have a good one.